A lot of you mentioned that you'd like to hear updates on stories that promise updates. Until now, I haven't made a dedicated video with a follow-up to a previous story, since most people who submit their stories never actually send one. However, an anonymous viewer who shared a beach story back in July of 2024 recently sent in an update. So I'll play the original story first, in case you'd like a refresher or haven't heard it yet. Otherwise, you can skip to the timestamp on the screen to jump straight to the updated part. Beaches have always terrified me. Well, not always. My fear is the direct result of what I'm about to tell you. As a kid, I used to love the shore. I remember spending many summers eagerly waiting for the weekends when my family and I would head to our beach house, or if I was lucky, my friend Charles would invite me to his. His beach house was even more fun. I was 16, and this was one of those special summer weekends. Charles, our friend Riley, and I were going to spend a few unsupervised days at Charles's beach house in LBI. Riley was a year older than us and had just gotten his license, so he'd be driving us down in his car. The drive was fantastic. Riley was a pretty uncoordinated driver back then, so most of the trip was spent laughing as he swerved and cursed at the road. It was great. We reached LBI in good time and immediately hauled our stuff inside. The layout of the house is important, so let me explain briefly. There was a front door, a garage door that connected the front and backyards, a sliding glass door in the back, and an upstairs deck that linked the bedrooms. A spiral staircase led from that deck straight down to the ground, so you could enter or exit the house from upstairs. The house sat along a lagoon, meaning the backyard faced a narrow channel of water, with houses lined up on the opposite side. We were at that ripe age where chasing girls was a top priority, and having a beach house all to ourselves felt like the perfect opportunity. We spent a few hours figuring out which girls were down the shore at the time and talking to them on Snapchat. Eventually, we connected with a group of 3 cute girls who said they'd come hang out at Charles's place. I had more than enough weed to last the weekend, and we'd swiped a few bottles of our parents' alcohol before leaving. Everything felt perfect. The girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun, flirty, and full of energy. It was clear where the night was headed. At one point, the 6 of us decided to smoke by the backyard pool. It was small but perfect for 6 slightly drunk, carefree teens. I remember it vividly: the soft bay breeze, the steam from the heated pool, and the slow curls of smoke rising into the night air. At that age, it felt like pure bliss. Then suddenly, Charles turned the music all the way down and stared over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned to look. I could barely make out the houses across the water, but I wasn't sure what he was staring at. One of the girls asked why he turned the music down, and Charles whispered that he saw someone standing on the opposite dock. I laughed, thinking he was joking. "Who cares, bro? People literally live here," I said. Charles shook his head. "I know that family personally. My parents said they're in Florida for the week." Even then, I thought he was exaggerating or just trying to freak us out, so I kept laughing. The girls, though, were visibly uneasy and said they wanted to go inside. I wasn't going to argue. The 6 of us started getting out of the pool and drying off in the yard. That's when Riley suddenly jumped, cursed, and stared toward the lagoon. The rest of us turned to look. Even though the light was dim, we could clearly see movement on the opposite dock. We froze, trying to focus our eyes on what we were seeing. Just then, a passing car on the road behind the lagoon lit up the area, and what we saw made my blood run cold. 4 tall silhouettes stood at the edge of the dock, facing us. It was impossible to tell what they looked like or what they were wearing, but there was no doubt. They were staring right at us. "Go inside, now," Charles said, his voice trembling as he motioned toward the sliding door. As we rushed inside, I heard a sound I'll never forget. 4 consecutive splashes echoing from the water behind us, the sound of something or someone diving in. Those guys were swimming across the lagoon. We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The girl screamed while Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. Charles sprinted to the front to lock that door too, and the 6 of us huddled in a room that wasn't visible from the outside. We waited in silence, horrified at what we might hear next. Minutes passed. Nothing. Out of nowhere, Riley cursed under his breath, realizing he'd forgotten to lock the sliding door on the upstairs deck. Charles began to panic, knowing it was only a matter of time before someone broke in. Then we heard it, soft, quiet footsteps above us. That was the last straw. None of us had any weapons, and we were all intoxicated. Running was our only option. We bolted for the front door and sprinted to the car. Riley started it in a flash, tires screeching as we tore out of the driveway. In the chaos, he clipped and destroyed Charles's mailbox, but no one cared. We just needed to get away. Once we were far enough down the road, we called the police. The whole ordeal was a nightmare. When we finally returned with the officers, the news shattered us. All the valuables from the top floor were gone. But that wasn't the worst part. Charles's family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler, and it was missing too. It had most likely been used as the getaway vehicle. Charles's dad usually kept a spare key in a small hatch under the steering wheel, and the police concluded that's how the thieves escaped so quickly. How they knew exactly where that key was hidden is something I still wonder about. The police were never able to catch the perpetrators, and probably never will. Charles, Riley, and I always suspected it was someone who knew Charles's family, someone who knew where the key was, and that the house was supposed to be empty that weekend. It's been years since that night, but not a single day goes by that I don't lock every door and window in my home. Take my advice. Lock your doors at night. The update. Okay, so I never thought I'd be revisiting this story again. But recently, something happened that changed that. This update isn't exactly my story, but it's directly connected, and I'll do my best to tell it. Before I dive in, here's a quick recap. When I was 16, I spent a weekend at my friend Charles's beach house in LBI with our other friend, Riley. We were hanging out in the pool with some girls when we noticed people standing across the lagoon watching us. Moments later, they jumped into the water and started swimming towards us. We panicked, ran inside, but didn't lock up properly. The strangers broke in, robbed the house, and even stole Charles's family boat, their Boston whaler, as their getaway. The authorities never caught them, and the boat was never found. That's where the story ended. Over the years, Charles and I fell out of touch after going to different colleges and cities. I didn't really keep up with what happened afterward, but recently I ran into him, completely by chance, at our high school reunion. To be honest, I wasn't even planning on going. My girlfriend convinced me it might be fun to see how everyone turned out. I didn't have high expectations, but I figured, why not? I showed up alone, which was awkward enough. But the moment I walked into the venue, I spotted Charles across the room. He was talking to Riley and a few other guys from our old friend group. It felt surreal, seeing people you hadn't spoken to in years, who somehow looked both exactly the same and completely different. I joined their circle, and we started catching up, like no time had passed. As the night went on, the crowd started to thin, and people broke off into smaller groups. Charles pulled Riley and me aside and asked if we wanted to grab a drink at a nearby bar after things wrapped up. Riley couldn't. He said he had an early flight the next morning, but I was in. So we ended up at this little dive bar, reminiscing over a few beers. I can't remember exactly how it came up, but eventually we started talking about that night at his beach house. The topic floated into the conversation naturally, but as soon as it did, Charles slapped the table like he'd just remembered something he hadn't thought about in years. I should mention, I actually wrote some of this down in my notes app that night, just so I could retell it as accurately as possible. Because what Charles said next was wild. He started explaining that his little brother, Kieran, is 19 now, and apparently he and his friends are way bigger troublemakers than we ever were. About a year ago, Kieran and two of his buddies decided to take the family's new boat out without permission. This was the replacement they'd gotten after the insurance payout from the stolen one. Their plan was simple, or so they thought. They'd take the boat out for a late afternoon cruise, drink a bunch of beer, and head back before dark. Obviously, that's incredibly stupid and dangerous, not to mention illegal since they're all underage. But it gets worse. Charles said they were feeling adventurous, so they decided to anchor near Carl Island. I had to look this up later. Apparently, it's technically part of the Forsyth Wildlife Refuge, which means you're not supposed to be there at night. Their idea was to anchor the boat as close to the island as safely possible, finish off their beers, swim to shore, and hang out there to watch the stars or whatever. So they did exactly that. They swam to shore, found a quiet spot on the beach, and settled in as the sun began to set. They were just sitting there, talking, waiting for the stars to appear, when one of Kieran's friends noticed another boat anchored further down the shoreline. Kieran looked over, and from what Charles told me, he immediately became convinced that the boat looked exactly like their old Boston whaler, the one that had been stolen all those years ago. Now, keep in mind, it was getting dark, and the other boat was pretty far away. So Charles had a hard time believing his brother could really be sure. But Kieran refused to believe it was just some random boat. So he convinced his friends to swim out there with him to get a closer look. And that's exactly what they did. They swam all the way out, and by the time they reached it, Kieran was certain it was his family's old boat. Here's where things got frustrating. Kieran wanted to take pictures to show his parents, but of course they hadn't brought their phones into the water, and by the time they could have swum back to get them, it would have been too dark to capture anything. One of his friends suggested calling the police, but Kieran and the other friend were terrified. They'd been drinking, took the boat without permission, and they weren't even supposed to be near that island. Calling the cops was basically the last thing they wanted to do. Instead, they decided to swim back to their own boat, drive it closer to the other one for pictures, and figure it out once they got home. They started swimming back toward the beach to cut some distance. And that's when things got really bad. As they walked along the sand, one of Kieran's friends suddenly turned around and froze. There was a man walking toward them. Charles said Kieran was sure the man picked up speed the moment they turned around, like he was chasing them. And according to Kieran, the guy was carrying a shovel. That was the scariest part. The boys bolted. The man started running after them. They sprinted as fast as they could back to their boat. When Kieran glanced over his shoulder one last time, the man had changed direction, now running back the other way, presumably toward his boat, which was much closer to shore. They jumped aboard and fired up the engine.